Corinthians. You know, I'm going to have several different speakers. We may not preach all the chapters in order because Brother Donnell's going to have to be gone for quite some time. He's going to see his, I believe, your daughter get married. Is that correct? And he's teaching chapter 14. I'm sorry, chapter 11. Brother Dewey's teaching chapter 14. I'm sorry to scare you, Brother Donnell. He's teaching chapter 11, and Brother Dewey's teaching chapter 14. But so we may not teach them in order because we may have to move on to something else and wait for Brother Donnell to get back. But the reason I bring this up is because I had the pastor teach chapter 7 because it was on marriage. And he's been married. They've been married 40 years, I think, 39 or 40 years. And well, my brother Rowan went right up until 45 after the first week he taught on chapter 7. And my son, smart aleck that he is, I don't know where he got it from, but he came in the door and he said, "Daddy," he said, "why was the pastor teaching your Sunday school class? Did you get fired?" But we are going to have some other speakers come in, and I'm looking forward to it. And it's not that I can't teach the chapters. Of course, I know these men that I've chosen will do a better job. But I just think that it'll help the class that way, keep things kind of new and fresh. So, but right now we're going to take another cursory look at chapter 8 before we move into chapter 9. Are there any? I told y'all if y'all wanted to read it again, and if y'all found something new, we'd discuss it. Are there any questions or comments referring to chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians? Anything anybody wants to bring out that you noticed that I didn't get to? Well, I think it'll be worth our while to read it again. And then we're going to look at just some little tidbits, and then we're going to move into chapter 9. Now, as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we have knowledge. We know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know. But if any man love God, the same is known of him. As concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be many gods and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in Him, and one Lord Jesus Christ. Notice he gives them their total equality. He gives God and Christ total equality there. Notice that. And we by Him, verse 7. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. But meat commendeth us not to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. But take heed, lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. For if any man see thee which hast knowledge set at meat in the idol's temple, shalt not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish, for whom Christ died? But when ye sin so against the brethren, and wound their weak conscience, ye sin against Christ. Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. Now this goes right along with, if you look at chapter 9 and verse 20, this goes right along with that. He says, and unto the Jew I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews, and to them that are under the law, and to them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. to them that are without the law, as without the law, being not without the law to God, but under the law of Christ, that I might gain them that are without the law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. So this goes right along with that. His attitude is, he said, I'm going to be whatever I need to be in order to deal with people. Now this doesn't mean that to the drunks I became a drunk. That's not what he's saying there. He's not saying I went in the bar and tied one on so I could witness to a fellow over here that was drunk. It's not what he's saying. What he is saying is, if I witness to a fellow and I smell beer on his breath, it's not going to cause me to recoil. I'm not going to think that I'm better than he is because he's got beer on his breath and I don't. That's what he's saying. You know, he said to the Jew, remember Paul was a Jew, but he said, if they've got certain standards, I'm not going to purposely set out to offend them because I don't have those standards. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to become whatever I need to become so that I might by any means save some. And that's what he's saying here, because remember, in the context, the question is, there are those individuals who are offended because the meat that's being offered, the meat here is being offered to idols. Now remember, this sacrificial meat, this is some choice meat. I mean, this is some good stuff. This is not bologna. And if you like bologna, I can't imagine why, but it's not. But this is porterhouses and T-bone steaks. You know, so the believers who had knowledge, the believers who had knowledge, that they're saying, well, this idol's nothing. There's no God but one. So if I get a chance to go in here and eat it, to me it's just a piece of meat. But the question was brought up. Well, what about the weaker brethren who think that by your eating that meat, you are endorsing idolatry? By your eating that meat. So that's the question here. So Paul said, look, it's not a big thing. We know there's only one God. We have that knowledge. But not all men have that knowledge. So you don't want to offend your brethren, because remember, the idea of standards, as we went into in depth last week, the idea of standards and convictions, they have to be governed by love. They have to be governed by kindness. We talked last week about the standards need to be governed by love, and standards also, you have standards to serve. You know, as we read about standards and convictions and liberty, as we read about those things, you'll find in several verses, you'll find love mentioned. You need to love the brother, and it says here, be careful about knowledge concerning standards, because knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. So here it's connected to charity, and it's also connected to service. The reason we have standards and convictions is because we can serve better, so our light can shine brighter. But I grew up, and I'm going to try not to go off on a tirade here, but I grew up right in the teeth of radical fundamentalism in Christianity. I mean, I grew up right in the teeth of it. And the idea was, the idea became more about standards than it became about anything else. And what happened was, because individuals lifted themselves up. Well, I only wear white shirts. You know, my hair is an inch shorter than your hair is. Therefore, I have more standards than you do. Well, what if you're bald? Then you got great standards in that respect. You know, you don't have any hair. So that kind of stuff kind of got a little silly. You know, shooting your televisions with shotguns and all that sort of thing. It kind of got a little silly. But then we went too far the other way. So standards have to be governed by something. You ought to have standards. It's right to have standards. If you don't have any standards, now I'm not going to say what Lester Roloff said. If you don't have standards, follow mine till you get some. I'm not there yet. I wouldn't recommend you do that. But you ought to have some standards. Everybody ought to have some things you do and don't do for the cause of Christ. Not to go to heaven, but because so you'll have a better influence. That's biblical. That's biblical. And you know, and this idea, I was talking to a fellow one time, and he was getting on to me, and I don't mind somebody getting on to me if they have any sense. But when somebody who has zero sense and zero credibility starts getting on to me, that irks me. I don't like that. So he was getting on to me a little bit, and because the night before I was at a Bible study, and they had Bible study every week, and they had a meal in their home. You know, we'd have a meal in their home, and then we would have Bible study. Well, so we were going down the road, and he started getting on to me because me and another fellow was talking about a movie. We were discussing, and it's not a bad movie. There's no sex or nudity or anything like that in it. It's not a bad movie. We're discussing the movie, but a missionary was present. It was his first time there. We didn't really know him. He didn't really know us. So when we got finished, the next day we're riding around. He said, "Boy," he said, I sure hope that y'all didn't offend that missionary by discussing that movie." He said, we were sitting around talking after you left, and we were real concerned about your influence of that missionary. Well, I don't know if I should have said what I said. I probably shouldn't have. I mean, I don't know. But I said, let me tell you this. And I called him by name. I said, let me tell you this. I said, if he was the kind of missionary that would be offended over a movie, he's also the kind of missionary that would be offended by everybody in the room wearing shorts. Every man in the room had shorts on and a goatee. I said, now I'm not offended by shorts, and I'm not offended by goatees. I said, but that missionary, if he's from the same ilk that would get offended over a movie, he would get offended over goatees and shorts. And then he kind of got this blank look on his face, and he said, he said, we do that kind of stuff on purpose so we can shock these Pharisees out of their comfort zone. And I said, so if it's something that I do, it might cause a missionary to be offended. But if it's something that you do, you're doing God's work because you're shocking the Pharisees out of their... See, we can't be like that. We can't be like that. We have to be consistent. Standards can get you in a lot of trouble. Standards can isolate you. If you got so many standards and convictions, and if you're wound so tight that everybody's got to walk around eggshells on you, how are you going to help anybody? See, Paul said, and he's the greatest Christian that ever lived, in my opinion. He's the greatest Christian that ever walked the face of the earth, and he said, I'm all things to all men. He said, I can become whatever I need to be. He said, to me all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. He said that in chapter 6. Then he said in chapter 10, all things are lawful unto me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. So we got to be careful about standards, and they have to be governed by some things. I want to give you 3 points, and then we're going to move on to chapter 9 if there aren't any comments. As we read this whole chapter is really about knowledge. The whole chapter is. Number 1, if we look at verses 1 through 3, we see knowledge has to be tempered with love. Knowledge has to be tempered with love. Knowledge concerning standards, in this case, the specific standards of eating meat offered to idols. Knowledge has to be tempered with love. And in verses 4 through 7, we see that we need the knowledge of God. Notice that Paul here, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Paul gives Christ and God absolute total equality. You got to know who He is and what He did for you. Absolute total equality. So we see, number 1, we see knowledge tempered with love. Number 2, we see we need knowledge of God. And number 3, as we look at verses 8 through 13, we see knowledge used responsibly. Knowledge used responsibly. See, the knowledge of standards has to be used responsibly. I mean, I know that if I turn on my television, which I don't have cable anymore, but I don't want to sound spiritual. I watch Netflix, so don't think I'm too spiritual because I don't have cable. But if I turn on my television and I watch the show called The Office, well, I think that's a hilarious show. You know, but if somebody comes in my house that I don't know, I'm probably going to turn it off because they may not think it's hilarious. They may think you shouldn't watch anything but Gunsmoke. All right, so if they, and Gunsmoke to me is kind of boring. He does the same thing every week. It's the same thing every week. So to me, that's kind of boring. But I mean, somebody else might say, well, if it's not black and white, it's wicked. All right, so since I don't know that, then I'll turn that off, because again, I have the knowledge. I'm persuaded in and of myself, in my own mind. Okay, this is just not that big a deal. Watching this show is not that big a deal. But I don't want to offend somebody else. So rather than turning the volume up and watching the show while they're there, and then if they get upset because maybe somebody curses or something, they get upset, and then I call them a Pharisee. Well, that's not real bright. So again, the knowledge that we have concerning standards, they need to be guided with love. I think we should do this before we go to chapter 9. Go to chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians. Everybody knows where I'm going with this. By the way, charity, the words charity and love are synonymous with one another. They are synonyms. But charity really implies, if you look at the way the word charity is used in society and things, charity really implies an outgoing of love. I mean, it really implies, see, you can love a dog. Some people love their dog. And the last dog I had, I loved it. It's gone now. But some people can love a dog. Some people can love steak. Some people can love, but charity implies the outpouring of helping people and the outpouring of love. But let's just read chapter 13 and just see the importance of it. Really doesn't matter what other talents you have, and it really doesn't matter how many standards you have and how proficient you are in a certain area if you don't love people. If people don't listen, Ronnie Dawson, I'm on YouTube, and I don't think he'll mind me saying this. Ronnie Dawson is a little bit nuts. He's just, and if he was sitting here, which I don't know if I'd say it if he was in here, but he'd probably grin a little bit if he heard me say. But listen, Ronnie Dawson could get away with a lot because people knew he loved them. He could get away with all kinds of stuff, because people knew that but beneath that gruff exterior, he loved them. And also, he never asked people to do something he wasn't doing himself. He never asked people to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. But you can get away with a lot if people are convinced that this individual loves me and has my best interests at heart, then they're able to rebuke you. Proverbs talks all about that a wise man will take rebuke, and that faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. So if somebody knows you love them and you're trying to help them, that you can usually, no matter how rough you have to be in private, you can usually help somebody. But let's look at this chapter. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, he says, listen, I got it down pat. I got it down pat. I'm a great orator. I can deal with anybody. I'm highly educated, meaning that I can speak any tongue that I need to speak, and I can use my tongue to inspire people and to elevate people. Listen, I've got it down. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. You take two big old cymbals in the Philharmonic Orchestra, I think it's called. You take two big old cymbals, and right on cue, he slams them together. He's got his arms right here, and he slams them together, and all you hear is ting. That's all you hear. That's what you're doing if you don't have charity. That's all you're doing if you don't have charity. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass, or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries. Wouldn't you like to understand all mysteries? Wouldn't you like to understand all the mysteries of the Bible and all the mysteries of life and why it's got to be this way? Lord, why did it take me 10 minutes to get my sock on this morning? That don't make any sense. That doesn't make a bit of sense. Now, y'all don't have that issue, but I do sometimes. But wouldn't you like to understand all mysteries and have all knowledge? That'd be something. But what is it compared to mastering a charitable attitude? And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, look at this. And though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing. Charity is more important than the ability to move mountains. Listen, we teach little kids this chapter and we just kind of go by it. You know, it's one you find it on plaques, and of course a lot of times they replace the word charity with love. You find it on plaques and people read it at weddings. You know, but look how powerful this is. The ability to move mountains and understand all mysteries and have all knowledge and have the gift of prophecy pales in comparison to loving people, having charity. Listen, if I love my family, if I really love my family, there's just certain things I'm not going to do repeatedly. I'm not going to say I won't make mistakes. I'm not going to say I don't struggle with some things, but I'm not going to do certain things flippantly and jeopardize my family if I love my church and love my pastor and love the members of Faith Baptist Church. There's certain things I'm going to keep a watch on for my sake and for their sake. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long. You say, how long? I don't know. I don't know. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Well, I tell you what, listen, if you talk to me in a certain tone of voice, I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. You better be careful. I better be careful. I don't have a whole lot to spare. You better be careful about dishing out pieces of your mind. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself. Is not puffed up. Doth not behave itself unseemly. Seeketh not her own. Is not easily provoked. Well, that's a rough one, isn't it? I mean, it may not be hard for Rob Donnell or David Rowan, but it says, is not easily provoked. Is not easily provoked. I lost my place. Where am I? Thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth. Beareth all things. Believeth all things. Hopeth all things. Endureth all things. Charity never faileth. Look at this now. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. That's this right here, by the way. When that which is perfect is come, this is part of it. This is perfect. This book right here is perfect. When that which is perfect is come, then that which is imperfect shall be done away. This one here gets me too. This calls me to contemplate not watching as much football. Now, I'm not saying if you watch football you're childish. I still watch it on occasion. I'm just saying how the verse dealt with me. That's all I'm saying. This got me about shooting my mouth off like an impulsive kid, talking about myself all the time. You know, I had several preachers pull me aside and say, "Be careful how many times you use the word I." And so I'd find myself, because a lot of times I preach in my office, and I would try to phrase sentences without using the word I. That's hard to do. That's hard to do. But listen, I it's not about I. It's not about me. It's about Christ. It's about people. It's about others. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I spake as a child. That's what kids do. They speak as children. I understood as a child. Well, I want what I want, and I want it now, and don't try to stop me. You ever seen somebody, I know y'all have never done it, but have y'all ever seen anybody act childish? Well, listen, if you're not going to do what I want you to do, then we just don't. Then you just don't need to worry about me. You kind of go somewhere and pout. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. See, that's the thing. I don't want to understand as a child. I don't want to be 41 years old. You ever seen somebody that just has no discretion? They'll just say right in front of everybody. They'll just blurt something out right in front of everybody. And then if you call them on it, they'll say, oh, it's not a big deal. And they'll kind of laugh. Oh, it's not a big deal. Nobody heard it. People heard it. People heard it. But I don't want to be 41 years old and not have any discretion, not have any discernment, not have any wisdom. I don't want to understand as a child. But you know what's going to provoke me to change? Charity. Because I love my wife, I need to tighten up in some areas. Because I love my church, I need to tighten up in some areas. Because I love my kids and I want to be a good example to them, I need to tighten up in some areas. That's what's going to provoke me to change. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, Ronnie Doss, every time he sees a four-wheeler or a motorcycle or something, he'd say, a grown man still got tricycles, still playing with toys. And he'd say, when I became a man, I put away childish things. And because I'd be on the four-wheeler, me and James or somebody, we'd be riding around on four-wheeler. I don't know if that's the application. I don't know if that's the application, but I guess, whatever works for you in this verse. I mean, if you're spending too much time on the four-wheeler, maybe you need to get rid of it. But I don't know if that fits here. But it says, when I became a man, I put away childish things. I tell my boys, because my boys are always like, you ever notice how a child, they talk about being an adult, but they still, like, they'll take their money in this scenario and they'll buy childish things with it. Like, when I'm 21 years old, I'm gonna buy all the Legos in the world. Well, so that they got that adult age, but they still got that childish mind. And I said, well, son, I hope when you're 21, unless you're using it for some kind of engineering project, I hope you don't spend all your money on Legos. But it says, when I became a man, I put away child. See, I tell my boys, I said, being an adult is doing what you're supposed to do instead of what you want to do. It doesn't matter. I know 50, 60-year-old people that I don't view them as adults. Now, I'm respectful to them because they're older than I am. But being an adult is knowing when you can make a comment and when you can't. Being an adult is being able to discern, okay, if I make this comment, it's wildly inappropriate to make this comment right now. That's being an adult. But being an adult is when you pay the light bill instead of buying a new video game. That's being an adult. Being an adult is when you do what you should do. When you do what you're supposed to do. When you buckle down and toe the line, whether you want to or not. That's being an adult. When I became a man, I put away childish things. What's going to motivate us to do that? Charity. We're talking about charity right now. See, Paul said, have standards. Have standards. Be a light, but have charity. Let it be temporal. Listen, we need to have our knowledge concerning standards needs to be mixed with love. We need to have a knowledge of who God is. And knowledge needs to be used responsibly. Don't use your liberty that you have in Christ as a stumbling block. Don't use it as a cloak of maliciousness. When I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see through a glass darkly. But then face to face, now I know in part, but then shall I know even as I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity. These three. But the greatest of these is charity. Listen, this chapter, this idea of charity and loving others has really gotten a hold of me lately. I don't know, maybe it's because I had a little girl. You know, every once in a while I got to yell at the boys and get rough on them. You know, I had to bear down on them. But I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that to my little girl. I don't know if it's gonna work. You know, I had to. We was in Firehouse. We was in Firehouse. One of my favorite places to be is in Firehouse. We was in Firehouse eating. We were in Firehouse eating, Brother Donnell. And we were in Firehouse, and she grabbed the joystick on my chair. Well, that's a safety issue. She can't do that. Well, so I popped her, and man, that bottom lip stuck out, and she went to crying. I started squalling with her. Here I'm a grown man, supposed to be tough. I'm supposed to be tough and ready to go to battle. That's what I'm supposed to do. And Renita looked at me and she said, "Are you crying?" She said, "You got to toughen up." I said, "You got to give me time to get there. You got to give me time to get my mind right. I got a little girl now." Yeah. But and some of you that's got girls, you're like, you just wait and see. You wait and see. You'll tighten up. But listen, this idea of charity and loving people. See, it's okay to have an agenda, and it's okay to have your standards, and it's okay to have someplace you want to be. But if I'm sacrificing people to get there, if I'm hurting people to get there, to get to what I want to be, it's not going to work. It's not Christ-like. Jesus said, He didn't say they're going to know you by the miracles that you perform. It's not what He said. He said they're going to know you by how you love people. All right, quickly, moving on to chapter 9. We're going to read it, and we may get into part of it in the next, just in the little bit of time we have left. Chapter 9. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not ye my work in the Lord? If I be not an apostle unto others, yea, doubtless I am an apostle to you. He said, you've seen what I've done. He said, you're saved because of my influence and testimony. He said, yea, doubtless I'm an apostle unto you, for the seal of mine apostleship are ye in the Lord. Mine answer to them that do examine me in this. So he's been asked some things here. He's been challenged on some things. Mine answer to them that do examine me in this. Have we not power to eat and to drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as other apostles? And as the brethren of the Lord and Cephas. Of course, Cephas is Peter. Peter was married. I don't get that about other religions. He's supposed to be their first pope. And the priests aren't allowed to get married. Well, their first pope was married. Jesus healed his mother-in-law. It's pretty obvious. Anyway, that's free. That's nothing to do with the message. Or I only and Barnabas, have not we power to forbear working? Now, normally I read the whole chapter, but we're only going to read down to verse 18, and we're going to deal with this first section and be finished. Who goeth to warfare any time at his own charges? Who planteth the vineyard and eateth not the fruit thereof? Or who feedeth the flock and eateth not the milk of the flock? Say I these things as a man, or saith not the law of the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Or saith he, man, I can't see this morning. Or saith he altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and he that thresheth in hope should be partaker. He that threshes in hope should be the partaker of his hope. If we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it not a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things? If others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffer all things lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ. I think I think we'll start reading. We'll stop reading there because the next verse takes us into another section. But what he does here, very quickly, what he does here, first of all, he validates his apostleship. He validates his apostleship here, and we'll look into other verses next week. But he validates his apostleship, and he talks about. He says, "Listen," he says, "I could go and do some of the things that these other apostles have done. I could have a wife." He said, "This is not wrong." And then in verse 7, going down through about verse 12 or 13, he talks about the idea of preachers who receive something from the ministry. Now we know that that preachers ought to receive something from the ministry. Preachers and pastors, whatever we pay our pastor, he's worth 4 or 5 times. He's worth 4 or 5 times more. Whatever we pay him, we don't pay him enough. If we expect him to drop everything and do what we need and minister to us spiritually, then we got to take care of him. We got to take care of him. But having said all that, no one who knows him could legitimately say he's out for money. Now some dingbat might say it, but no one who knows him could legitimately say that he's out for money, that he's out to feather his own nest. See, once you become known as somebody who's trying to feather his own nest, it's hard to get that off. That doesn't wash off too easy. Once you become known as somebody who lobbies and makes cases to get more money and feather your own nest, that's difficult to get out from under. And Paul said, I could ask you these things. I could ask you to give me something carnal. And other times he did. Other times he took help from churches. At one point, only one church was helping him. Other times in his ministry, he was a tent maker. He said, I could ask you for something. Of course, he wasn't per se a pastor, but he said, I could ask you for something, but I'm not going to. See, he validated his influence here in this area. This thing of credit, I want to say this about credibility. This thing of credibility, if my credibility gets damaged, it's going to take a while for me to restore it. My Uncle Mac used to put it this way. He said a lot of people, they do 15 cents worth of work and want $1 worth of credit. Well, it doesn't work that way, folks. If I mess up in one area or another, and then I do pretty good for about a week, and then I get mad because nobody trusts me. And listen, this is an area that I know firsthand because early even after I got saved, I was one of those that was in and out and up and down and on and off. Now the Lord's blessed me, and I've managed to avoid some mistakes, and I think I'm leaving a large portion of that reputation behind. But this thing about because Paul was doing what he was supposed to do, see, he could validate his credibility because of the way he lived his life. If his credibility was called into question, which it was, if his credibility was called into question, he had the ammunition to validate his credibility. If you don't have the ammunition to validate your credibility, you need to be quiet. I need to be quiet until I do. I need to be very careful and very quiet until I have the ammo to validate my credibility. See, when Paul's credibility, Brother Archer, was called into question here, he had no problem. He had no problem coming back with it and saying, okay, this is how it is. He had no issues with it. But for other people, it might be different. For me, for a long time, it was different. But here, he validates his credibility in this area. He said, I'm not going to be known. I'm going to go above and beyond. Just like Nehemiah. Remember the book of Nehemiah? When Nehemiah didn't take a salary for, I think it was 2 years. I think it was 2 years he didn't take a salary. But he said, I'm going to go above and beyond. He said it's biblical to ask for carnal things or earthly things, earthly things, material things, in exchange for my spirit, the spiritual services that I've rendered to you. And at other times he did. If you read all his epistles, other times he did take it. Other times he said, I'm going here to get some things from this church. But in this case, for whatever reason, he didn't do it. He was able to validate his apostleship in the previous verses, and he was able to validate his influence in this particular area because he had the necessary ammo to do it. He was not standing on shaky ground in this area. And this really helped me because I've pushed for certain things in the past. I've pushed for certain things, financially speaking, that I just should not have pushed for. But in this area, Paul had credibility. Paul said, look, and if you read down further, you know what he says? He says, woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. Woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. He said, I'm not doing this for a paycheck. I'm not doing this for a paycheck. Listen, we have a pastor. We ought to pay him. We ought to pay him more than we pay him if we can. But he's not doing it for a paycheck. I think we all know that. I think we all know that he's not a man who gets up and gets his sermons out of a book and goes through the motions and just cashes his check every week. That's what made the Apostle Paul such a great preacher of the gospel, because he was passionate. He was passionate about loving people. He was passionate about preaching the gospel. And this caused me to examine, as it should cause all of us to examine, my own credibility in some areas. But we'll get more into it next week. We only got just kind of skim the surface of those few verses. We'll get more into it next week. I'm going to ask Brother Joe Jones to stand up and lift your voice, sir, and close us in prayer.